Alright, hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another video. This one is going to be on how to actually begin to charge like your dream rate, whether it's like, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month for a client with your social media marketing agency or your social media marketing consulting or your marketing consulting or Facebook ads agency, whatever it is that you want to call it. In general, that's what I teach on this channel. I teach you how to start and scale a social media marketing consulting business, and because I think it's one of the biggest opportunities out there on the planet right now, and a lot of my students get stuck charging $400, $500, $600 a month, whereas I'm out here, charging $2,000, $3,000 a month for services, and I got one-off trainings that I'll sell for $5,000, and I've got a good grasp on my market value, and that's really what I want to talk about in this video, is how to know your market value and how to actually build a business around your market value, and how to have the right perspective on money in order to achieve these things. So this is not going to be a video of, all right, here's how to sell a $2,000 service that is actually worth $200. It's not a sales thing. It's not a manipulation thing. It's not a lying thing. It is a genuine, bare bones, here's how to increase your market value as a business, and here's how to bring more value to the marketplace in order to charge more. And so let's first look at the base of all economics and the base of all human relationships. And that's that, and I'm just going to sort of draw two stick figures here. And that's that all economics and all human relationships are transaction. That T stands for transaction, okay? And so let's say I like a girl and I decide that I want to date her. She's going to say no if she doesn't like me, okay? She's going to say yes if she does. And that would initiate the transactional basis upon which we can build a romantic future together, if we do at all, right? But they have to like you, you have to like them, transaction. I value the person's time more than they value their own, or more than I value my own, and they value my time more than they value their own. Therefore, we transact and spend, keyword spend, time together. And in this same instance, though, let's talk business here. We're going to forget the romance thing. Let's talk business, okay? Transactions only happen when this person values your service more than they value the money they have to spend in order to acquire the service. And you value their money more than I'll just draw a hammer for the instance that I'm going to use here. It's a really poorly drawn hammer, whatever though. You value their money more than the work that you have to put in order to achieve the outcome that they want. Okay? That's when a transaction happens. And money is a great mediator. That's all money is a mediator for relationships, okay? And so when you view money that way, that destroys anything and everything that most people think money is. They think it's this evil thing. They think it's, you got all kinds of weird, crazy beliefs out there about what money is, why it works, how it works. It's just a mediator. That's all it is. So that's the first thing you got to understand. Okay, if you're stuck charging $400, $500, $600 a month, it's because you don't view money as a mediator, and you haven't yet increased the value that you bring to, and the stick figure is gone, but I'm pointing at the stick figure that would have been there if I hadn't erased him. You are not aware that you can simply increase the value of the problem that you solve. So let me go into some variables here. So there's a couple things that you got to consider when you're selling any service. And I learned this back in my wedding photography days, okay? So if you've been following me for a minute, you know that I actually started my entrepreneurial career as a wedding photographer, and I actually would, at 16 years old, would charge, $1,000 for a day of my time to shoot a wedding. Right, or more on some occasions, and I hadn't finished high school at the time, and I never did end up finishing high school, and I'm not going to college, and that's because I understand these basic things that for some reason nobody seems to teach. So here's some variables that come into play when you're actually selling a service, and you're actually defining the value at which you could sell the service at, okay? So first of all, I'm going to remove this just because it takes up needed space. First off, I'm going to start with probably the most important one, and that's perceived value, okay? And this is something I teach on for a lot of my coaching students. I teach it in my course as well, is increasing your perceived value. how do you do that? And what is perceived value? And why does it matter? So perceived value is the consumer's perception of how valuable the service or product is, despite how valuable the service or product actually is, okay? And what you're doing here is, for example, if you are selling, and you can just watch the first episode of the show Mad Men. This is a great example of this. And in the show Mad Men, it's about, and I don't really inherently like the show, it paints a really bad picture of what business is, but, you know, really, you watch the first episode, and it's a bunch of people who are trying to, and the show about Mad Men is about people in business, and their business is selling advertisements to businesses, okay? Similar to what we do now as digital marketers. Very similar, so it's a very cool show to watch. And the first episode, one of their clients, which runs a cigarette company, comes in and says, okay, now the news is out that cigarettes aren't that healthy. What do we do about that? How do we continue to advertise and actually sell more of our cigarettes? And they start kind of fumbling around. They can't really figure out a solution. How do we actually, you know, sell more cigarettes if now the public knows that they give you cancer? So how do we actually do that? And at first they propose, okay, let's just embrace it. Let's you know, there's subconscious data. There's data about the human subconscious that maybe they have a death wish and they kind of want to play on that edge of mortality, right? If that's the right word. And so, like, smoking a cigarette is like playing with your life and having control over your life, and we're going to kind of make it a bit edgy on purpose. And they say, absolutely not, we're not going to do that. But then they start looking at the process that cigarettes are created with, and he has to see, okay, how do you create your cigarettes? He says, well, we take, you know, the tobacco, we have tobacco farms in Guatemala or whatever, we take the tobacco, we take it outside, we roast it, and we toast the tobacco, and then we put it through this process. And he's like, toasted, that's a very cool concept, let's use that. And he's like, well, all of our competitors toast their tobacco, that's not special. But he says, let's tell them that we do that. That's perceived value. It adds another step in the process. And so, for example, with my agency, when I have an inbound call on my agency, I don't just say, yeah, I mean, you know, we've got a team of people, whatever, we'll figure it out along the way, sort of a thing. It's a no. We've been in this industry for X amount of years. We've spent this much money profitably, which at this point we can say we've spent over $1 million profitably on Facebook ads. You know, we stack the value. We add perceived value. Even though, to be honest with you, for a social media marketing agency, spending $1 million is not that hard. All you need to do is find a client that has a big budget and works with you for at least a year, and you've spent $1 million. It's really not that hard to do, but nobody says that. It's just a really cool little buzz phrase, right? And so you kind of find ways to increase your perceived value, and that will really, really help you. Look at your process and see if you can find little buzz phrases. Like for me, even, I didn't finish high school. Like, that degrades my perceived value for some, but massively increases my perceived value for those who actually know what's going on, you know? So that's the first thing you want to do, is actually identify areas of perceived value that you can tap into, so that when it comes time to say, all right, here's how much money we charge, it's going to be much easier to slide in a big number because they have a higher perceived value of your company, of your service, etc. And another thing with perceived value, so I'll just write process, you know, include pieces of your process that others might not, so that they understand it a little bit more and that they have a bigger picture or something like that, right? Just go back. I don't know if that's the right word for what I said, but whatever. Another thing is price. Another thing with perceived value is literally just pricing yourself highly is going to make you come off as more valuable. And this is something you don't want to play with too much, because if you price yourself highly and then your product or service stinks, then you're going to get a really bad rep, and you don't want that. So if you are afraid to charge $2,000 for your service, you need to look at it logically. Is anybody else doing that? If yes, do it. You know, you want to match, you know, the top 80 percentile of rates that your industry is charging, and just go for it and just match it instantly. And there's no reason not to, especially with a market as new as social media marketing, where we're all still kind of trying to figure out what the rates are. Of course, you want to actually be getting at least 5x return on investment for all your clients, including the ad spend and the retainer that they pay you. But that being said, you know, you should still try and increase your perceived value. So that's the first and probably most important variable in my opinion, because it all kind of comes down to perceived value. There, at the end of the day, isn't really any true marketplace value. All we really need is oxygen and food, love and shelter. everything else is just commodity. So really at the end of the day, everything is perceived value. So that's probably the most important one and very psychologically grounded there. The next one I would say is, let me think about this. We got perceived value, and then we got the problem solved. So first of all, what is the problem? Well, with a marketing agency, the problem is typically the business wants to make more money. Okay, that's the problem. And if you can solve the problem, what does it mean to solve a problem? It means to take the problem and fix it, right? So if we can make them more money, then we can get paid the amount of money that we deserve. Super simple, but a lot of people don't realize that. All you're really doing is having them pay you $1 so you can make them back 3 or 4. That's what you're trying to do as a marketer, okay? And so when you look at it from that simple of a vantage point, it helps you really digest and kind of think rationally through, all right, how valuable am I? How much of a problem am I solving? Okay? And what's interesting is on my sales calls, not everybody simply wants ROI. Not everybody wants a return on their investment. You'd think everybody would want direct return on their investment. You'd think that would be the most logical thing, but not everybody does. It's really interesting. You have to actually observe what they perceive the problem to be. And so let me give you an example. My agency, we do a handful of different things, but one of the things that I really like doing is working with information product sellers online and coaches to help them build better sales processes. And it's a very competitive niche. There's a lot of people like me doing it, and but there's so many people selling courses out there that it's just such an endless market. It's a lot of fun. We build webinar funnels for them, right? And you'd think that what somebody wants is a webinar funnel built, and they pay us X amount of money to do it, and then it comes back around and makes them at least 6, 7, 8 times more in the next 4 or 5 months or whatever, and then we run the ads and it all makes them more money. But that's not always the case. More often than not, you'll be surprised to find that people don't just want ROI. Sometimes they just want a webinar. And I'll say, look, this isn't quite the way that we do it. It might not make you money. They're like, okay, whatever, just do it. They want it, right? And sometimes they don't know what they want. But if you can position yourself as a solution to their problem, even if their problem isn't the right problem to have, that's going to help you a lot as well. So don't have some sort of romanticism towards a certain way of doing things. Have a romanticism towards diagnosing the problem and solving it, even if they have a wrong perception of the problem, okay? Now, here's what I typically do. If a client doesn't know what he or she wants, and I know better than them, I'll still do what they said to do, and I'll run it. But I will say, look, if this doesn't work, hold my word, we're going to go back to doing it the way that I said we should do it. And then, 2-3 months later, it doesn't work, and it's no surprise when they stay on the retainer because I told them that would happen. And so you got to position yourself as a solution to their problem, okay? And make sure that you're actually solving their problem, even if their problem is perceived to be different. Another example could be like with wedding photography. I personally know as a photographer that your gear only matters so much, okay? If you're a good photographer, you understand light, you understand composition, you understand storytelling, you really don't need to have that great of a camera. You could have a $400 camera and run a 6-figure wedding photography business off of it. You really could. And I knew that, and frankly, I kind of did that, I didn't have amazing gear, but I didn't have cheap gear. There was somewhere in between, it wasn't like pro level gear, but it also wasn't like, I was shooting on like, a crappy little camera you could buy at a dollar store, it was somewhere in between. And when a couple asked me, hey, what gear do you use? Instead of answering that question, I reverted the question. Because if they heard that I used kind of cruddy gear, they would have a lower perceived value, and they wouldn't view me as a solution to their problem, okay? It's just a very practical example of that. And so I reverted the question. I said, I honestly believe that the photographer matters. I'll rent gear if I need to, but my gear is pretty irrelevant to the process. And at first they were kind of skeptical, like, oh, isn't that really important? Like, no, and I just slid them over my portfolio. I'm like, just look at the pictures. Who cares what gear I use? The pictures are good, And that's another thing that we'll talk about here, is the result. And it's very similar to the problem solved, but kind of different, because problem solved is their perception of the problem and removing that problem. But the result is the measurable thing that they get at the end of the deal. And so Like if I build a Facebook ad campaign plus a funnel and somebody makes, like $10,000 profit in a month off of me, including the amount of money that they spent to have the consulting and have the ads running, maybe they spent $15,000 or something and they made $10,000 back, which is a pretty good ratio. That would be the result, okay? And so when you're thinking about perceived value, problem solved, I would probably put in parentheses perceived, just to really clarify here. Perceived, problem solved, and the result, then you can really begin to think, all right, how much am I actually worth? And you can begin to think, how can I actually increase my market worth? And I'll be honest with you, a lot of this comes down to two things. Whoops. There we go. One, that's a Z. We're at a 1 here, not a Z. 1, self-perception. Okay? If you don't perceive yourself as valuable, then you won't charge highly. It's just a matter of fact. You are never going to get paid more or less than the value in which you believe you are capable of charging. And what's interesting is that I've been able to break the norm in a small way because I didn't finish high school, not going to college, and all these sorts of other things that some people, the average Joe, would think are important. But I'm like here raising my hand in the back of the room like, hey, it's not important, and I'm proof that it's not important. And I'm not bashing college, I'm not bashing academia. I'm trying to help you understand that all that matters is the value you bring to the marketplace, and academia is a route to do so. So if that's the route you're taking, then take it with full force and be very diligent about it. So that's the first thing. Self-perception is probably the first thing. And then lastly is, how would I phrase this? You got self-perception and then client perception. So it kind of comes back to, again, perceived value, okay? So what's interesting is that, the reason Gucci can sell a watch that would otherwise only cost $100 is because they're Gucci. They've got a high self-perception, and then we have a high self-perception because they have the high self-perception, okay? And so really when you're selling anything, it is about perception, okay? And that includes the result. I'm not saying scam people. I'm not saying sell snake oil. I'm not saying sell things that aren't worth it. But it being worth it is a part of the perception. Okay, so that is included in the perception pie here. All right? Now, if you can increase your self-perception and honestly do so, and not lie to yourself, but find legitimate reasons to increase your self-perception, then you're going to be able to charge much more, much quicker. And so let me talk about one of the ways that you can increase your self-perception. Let's look at you. Okay? Most people, they are almost, I'm going to draw like a chain here. They're almost like directly attached in a weird way to their business. Okay? And that includes, for example, their emotions, their mood, their happiness, okay? And this is natural, because where your hands go, your heart tends to follow. And that's just how everybody works, okay? But what you have to practice doing, you have to practice the ability of separating yourself from your business and viewing your business from a set of rational thinking eyes that question everything and ask, a couple of questions. How can this be improved? How can we position ourselves? What's wrong with it? What can be fixed and how can we fix it, right? And you're actually looking at your business objectively. Instead of looking at it as such a closely knit thing to your emotion, your mood, your mental state, your habits, your happiness, everything, you have to look at this thing as a separate entity. And you have to be able to look at it as a whole. Okay? And so when you're looking at your business, you can't look at it as, I have to do this with my business. I have to look at it as a set of processes and a set of inputs and outputs and, and a set of, I guess, as a whole system, as a whole machine. And so instead of viewing your business so closely to yourself, you kind of have to view it as a machine, okay? as a whole machine with different cogs and different moving bits and levers and wires and whatever, and different buttons on top of it and different processes, I don't know, whatever, you get the point. You got to view it as a whole, okay, with a set of eyes that actually thinks rationally, otherwise you're pretty much going to never view yourself as valuable, because naturally humans are a very low self-perception creature. We kind of tend to forget what we're capable of. We tend to beat ourselves up and neglect the capabilities that we have, because we live in a world where there's a lot of comparison, and there's a lot of how would you call it? A lot of comparison, and there's a lot of envy, and there's a lot of self-deprecation. And there's healthy self-deprecation, there's humility, but humility and self-deprecation are not the same. To self-deprecate, I would consider to be a massive sin. I would consider that to be a denial of the potential that you're born with, So that's just some more spiritual, psychological stuff that you got to keep in mind when you're charging highly. We've gone through some more logical, perceived value, problem solved, the result driven. We've gone through some more psychological, separating yourself from your business so you can actually view it as an entity and as a whole. And when you do that, here's the amazing thing. Most people think that I am delivering and transacting directly with he, her client, money, and then, again, the hammer, which was a very poorly drawn hammer last time. See if I can do it better, and I can't, whatever, right? And so when you perceive this as a direct transaction, then the problem is, because we naturally have a very low self-esteem, most of us do, and it's just truth, then it's going to be really hard, And now you got to work on the self-esteem. I'm not saying accept that. Work on it. Build it. But if you can do something here where instead of saying me and client are transaction, and you start to think me plus the state of the market, which is like how valuable Facebook ads are, because Facebook ads are the most incredible thing to ever hit marketing ever, okay? So even if you suck, you're still pretty good, because Facebook ads is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Me plus the state of the market plus the business I've built and the machines and processes that run it, transacting with, he, she, client, then you begin to think a bit more rationally. It's not just you. It is you, plus how valuable the service is, plus the systems and machines that you've built to deliver the process, the contractors, the workflows, the understanding of Facebook ads that your contractors have, the softwares that you use, the tracking, the metrics that you understand, everything like that. Then you begin to view this a bit more rationally. And then your work is sort of shared across all of these, right? And they do a lot of the heavy lifting. And you're not really doing that much at that point. And the 7-figure earners that I've hung out with, they all understand this. Every single one of them views themselves as a tiny, 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 tiny cog in a much larger machine. And that's what you have to begin to build. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope I didn't get too woo-woo on you, but I have to when it comes to money, and I have to because it's a spiritual thing. It's not a material thing. It is, a very emotional, subconscious, spiritual thing. And if you don't view it that way, then there's a problem, because, money is not just slips of paper. It's the exchange of value. And if you can understand that, then you can build a massive business very quickly. And that is how to charge what you're worth, or how to charge more for your social media marketing agency services. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, subscribe. Come back for more soon. I have plenty of content lined up for you guys. If you have any suggestions for videos, leave a comment down below. And be sure, if you haven't yet, to turn on those post notifications. It's very helpful for me, algorithmic wise, but it's also helpful for you because you get first glimpse into the stuff that I'm sharing. And I think it's a great way to stay up to date with the channel and what I'm doing here. If you'd like free training on everything that I really know up to this point about starting and scaling a social media marketing consulting business or agency or Facebook ads agency or whatever you want to call it, got a long, hour-and-a-half long, like 400 slide training prepared for you in the description. Sign up, reserve your slot, and you can check that out. And also, if you're interested in a full-fledged program that has helped plenty of people drop out of college, whatever their job, and actually start a legit business, check that out in the description as well. You can enroll now at the beta price. It will be raising pretty soon because I'm adding a lot of content to it fairly quickly. So thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.